Imagine this. You're standing in a valley between two mountains. The grass reaches your knees. The air smells clean, like after a rainstorm. You hear something in the distance. Footsteps, but they're not normal footsteps. The ground shakes with each step. Boom, boom, boom. You look up, and walking toward you is a man. But he's not a regular man. He's twice as tall as any person you've ever seen, maybe 3 times as tall. His shadow covers you completely. His voice, when he speaks, sounds like thunder. This isn't a fairy tale. This isn't make-believe. According to ancient writings that have survived thousands of years, beings like this really walked our earth. They were called the Nephilim, the giants, the mighty ones, the fallen ones. Tonight, we're going back to that world. We're going to discover who they were, where they came from, and what happened to them. We'll explore mysteries that archaeologists still argue about today. We'll hear stories that have been whispered around campfires for generations, and we'll try to answer questions that might change how you see ancient history forever. So get comfortable, relax your shoulders, take a deep breath, let your mind travel back through time, past everything you know, to a world that existed before the Great Flood. A world of giants. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Night the Stars Fell. Before we talk about giants, we need to understand where they came from. And that story begins in a place we can barely imagine. A place of light and music and perfect order. A place where powerful beings served the creator of everything. These beings had names, though most are lost to us now. They were messengers, protectors. Some watched over nations, others carried important announcements. They could travel between heaven and earth in the blink of an eye. They were stronger than any human, smarter than any scholar. They had been created for a purpose, to serve and to worship and to help care for creation. But here's something interesting. They had something else too. They had choice. Think about that for a moment. These powerful beings, surrounded by glory and perfection, could choose. They could decide whether to stay in their place or to leave it, whether to obey or to rebel, whether to be satisfied with what they had or to want something different. And one night, some of them looked down at the earth. They watched humans living their lives, building homes, growing food, starting families, and they saw something that made them curious. They saw beauty, human beauty, the beauty of daughters of men, as the old texts call them. Now you might be wondering, what's so special about that? But you have to understand, these beings had never experienced desire like humans do. They had never felt attraction. They had never wanted something they weren't supposed to have. This was completely new to them. The ancient Book of Enoch, which isn't in most Bibles but was read by people thousands of years ago, tells us more about this. It says there were 200 of these beings who made a pact. They gathered on a mountain called Hermon. Mount Hermon still exists today, by the way. You can visit it. It sits between Lebanon and Syria. On that mountain, these 200 beings made a promise to each other. They swore an oath. They said, "We're going to do this together. We're going to leave our place in heaven. We're going to go down to earth, and we're going to take human wives for ourselves." Their leader's name was Semjaza. The texts give us other names too: Azazel, Arachiel, Ramiel, Kokabeel, Tamiel. Each one of these names meant something. Kokabeel meant star of God. Tamiel meant perfection of God. These weren't minor beings. These were high-ranking, powerful angels who knew exactly what they were doing. And so they fell. Not fell like tripping, fell like choosing to come down, like deciding to leave everything they knew for something forbidden. Imagine being a human living in those days. You're working in a field, maybe gathering wheat or tending sheep. The day feels normal. The sun is setting. The sky turns orange and pink. And then you see lights falling from the sky. Not meteorites. Not shooting stars. Something else. Something that moves with purpose. Something that lands near your village and takes the form of a man. But not quite a man. Something more. Something that makes you feel small and afraid and amazed all at once. This is how it began. This is the night that changed everything. The night that would lead to the rise of the giants. The night that would eventually lead to the greatest catastrophe the world had ever seen. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, let's talk about what happened next. Because when these beings took human wives, something unexpected happened. Something that had never happened before in all of creation. Their children were different. Chapter 2. The first giants. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if your parents weren't both human? I know that sounds strange, but stay with me. What if one of your parents was something else? Something more powerful? Something not quite from this world? The children born from the unions between the fallen angels and human women were called Nephilim. The word itself is interesting. In the old Hebrew language, it comes from a root word that means to fall. So Nephilim could mean the fallen ones, or those who fell, or even those who make others fall. But there was something else about them that stood out immediately. They were huge. The ancient texts tell us they were giants, not just tall people, not just big and strong. They were enormous. Some accounts say they were 15 feet tall. Other accounts say even more than that. Imagine a person so tall they could look through a second-story window while standing on the ground. Imagine a person whose hand could wrap completely around your entire body. When the first of these giants were born, people didn't know what to think. At first, maybe they seemed like miracles. Strong babies, healthy babies, babies who grew impossibly fast. A child who should have been learning to walk was already running. A child who should have been learning to talk was already speaking in full sentences. But as they grew older, something became clear. These weren't normal children. They had appetites that couldn't be satisfied. The Book of Enoch tells us something disturbing. It says these giants consumed all the food that humans had worked so hard to grow. They ate everything. And when the crops ran out, the text says they turned to eating animals. And when the animals ran out, some accounts suggest they turned to eating people. Now, I want you to hit that subscribe button if you're finding this interesting, because the story gets even more intense from here. We're going to explore things that most people never hear about, mysteries that connect to archaeological discoveries happening right now. But first, let's talk about who these giants became as they grew up. Their fathers, the fallen angels, taught them things. Secret knowledge, hidden wisdom, things that humans weren't supposed to know yet. Azazel, one of the leaders, taught men how to make swords and knives and shields and armor. He taught them the art of war. Before this, humans had tools for farming, for building, for hunting. But weapons designed specifically to kill other humans? That was new. Other fallen angels taught different things. Semjaza taught spells and how to cut roots for magic. Armaros taught how to break enchantments. Barakel taught astrology. Kokabeel taught the signs of the stars. Ezekiel taught knowledge about clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. Why is this important? Because suddenly, humans had knowledge they hadn't earned. They hadn't learned it slowly through experience and wisdom. It was just given to them. And with that knowledge came power. But power without wisdom is dangerous. The Nephilim grew up learning all of this. They became skilled warriors, brilliant strategists, master craftsmen. They could forge weapons better than anyone. They could build structures that seemed impossible. They understood secrets of the stars and the earth that gave them advantages over regular humans. And they used those advantages. They became rulers, kings, warlords, legends. People began to worship them, not as equals, not as friends, as gods. Think about how that would change society. Imagine living in a world where these giants decided everything, where they took whatever they wanted, where they made the rules and nobody could stop them because nobody was strong enough. The old ways of living together peacefully, of sharing resources, of respecting each other, all of that began to crumble. The Bible gives us a glimpse of this in Genesis chapter 6. It says that when these things happened, wickedness began to spread. Not just normal human mistakes and sins. It says, every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. That's a powerful statement. It means that goodness became rare, kindness became rare, love became rare. In its place came violence, cruelty, pride. The strong dominated the weak, the mighty took from the helpless, and the Nephilim, these half-angel, half-human giants, stood at the center of it all. But here's a question I want you to think about. Were they evil because of what they were, or were they evil because of what they chose to do? Could a Nephilim have chosen differently? Could one of them have used their strength to protect instead of to dominate? Could one of them have used their knowledge to help instead of to control? We don't have clear answers to these questions. The texts don't tell us about any good Nephilim, but the questions themselves are interesting, aren't they? They make us think about power and choice and responsibility. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. If you had the strength of a giant and the knowledge of angels, what would you do with it? Would you be able to resist the temptation to use it for yourself? Chapter 3, When Angels Walked Among Men. Let's paint a picture of what daily life might have been like in those strange days. Because this wasn't just about giants existing somewhere far away. This was about a completely different kind of world. Imagine you're a farmer. You wake up before sunrise, like farmers have done for thousands of years. You step outside your small home. Maybe it's made of mud, bricks, or stone. Maybe it has a thatched roof. You're planning to spend the day working in your field, planting or harvesting or tending your crops. But then you see him, one of them, a Nephilim warrior. He's walking through the village. Each of his steps covers the distance of 3 of yours. He's looking around, deciding something. Maybe he's deciding whose crops to take today. Maybe he's deciding which young men to draft into his army. Maybe he's just passing through, and everyone hopes he keeps passing and doesn't stop. You lower your eyes. You've learned not to look at them directly. It can be taken as a challenge. And challenging a Nephilim is like an ant challenging a human. It doesn't end well. Your neighbor, an old man who remembers when things were different, whispers to you. My grandfather told me stories, he says. Stories about when the Shining Ones first came down. He saw it happen. He saw them descend from the sky like falling stars. At first, people thought they were gods come to bless us. They were so beautiful, so powerful. They could do things we couldn't imagine, lift boulders we could barely move, see in the dark like it was day, heal injuries just by touching them. What happened, you ask, even though you know the answer? You're living the answer. They took what they wanted, the old man says. At first, just wives, women who were honored to be chosen by such beings. But then their children came, and those children were different, hungry, demanding, strong enough to take whatever their hunger desired, and their fathers taught them that might makes right. That power means you don't have to ask permission. This was the world, a world where the rules had changed, where the strong dominated not just through human strength, but through supernatural power. The fallen angels, they didn't hide what they were. They walked among humans openly. They set themselves up as kings and gods. They demanded worship. They expected tribute. Cities built temples to them. Scribes wrote poems about their greatness. Parents named their children after them, hoping to earn favor. And the knowledge they shared, it transformed everything. Suddenly, there were weapons that could kill more efficiently, poisons extracted from plants that the fallen angels pointed out, methods of working metal that made harder, sharper tools, ways of reading the stars that help predict seasons and plan campaigns. But along with useful knowledge came dangerous knowledge. The texts tell us that they taught spells and enchantments, root cutting and divination, ways of trying to control the spiritual realm, magic, if you want to call it that. Practices that the Creator had never intended humans to mess with. Why? Why would they teach these things? Some scholars think it was pride. The fallen angels wanted to be worshipped, and what better way than to give humans powers they'd never had before? Others think it was rebellion. If God didn't want humans to have this knowledge, then teaching it was a way of continuing their rebellion. Still, others think it was corruption. These beings had fallen in more ways than one. They had left their place in heaven. They had taken human wives against the natural order. Maybe something in them had twisted. Maybe they wanted to drag creation down with them. Whatever the reason, the result was clear. Humanity changed, not evolved exactly, changed. The innocence of the early generations was gone. In its place was sophistication mixed with violence, knowledge mixed with cruelty, power mixed with corruption. And everywhere, the Nephilim grew more numerous. The first generation had children of their own. Were those children giants too? The texts aren't completely clear. Some traditions say yes, the giant bloodline continued. Others suggest that while they were still larger and stronger than normal humans, they were smaller than their parents. What we do know is that their influence spread. Different regions had different giants who ruled them. They built kingdoms. They created dynasties. They made names for themselves that would echo through history. In fact, Some scholars believe that many of the ancient myths and legends we know today are actually distorted memories of the Nephilim, the Greek titans, the Norse giants, the gods and demigods of ancient cultures around the world. Could these stories all be pointing back to a real event? A time when beings of immense power really did walk the earth? It's a controversial idea, and historians debate it. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why do cultures separated by vast oceans all have stories about giants? Why do they all have myths about gods coming down from heaven and having children with humans? Could it be because something like this really happened, and the memory of it survived in the stories passed down through generations? If you're enjoying this exploration, make sure you've hit that like button. It helps more people discover these fascinating mysteries. And we're just getting started. Coming up, we're going to talk about some of the most famous Nephilim by name and explore archaeological discoveries that some people believe are evidence these giants really existed. Chapter 4. The Rise of the Mighty Ones. The Bible actually gives us a few specific names and details about certain giants. These weren't just nameless big people. They were individuals. They had identities. They made impacts that people remembered. Let's start with one you might have heard of, Goliath. Yes, that Goliath, the giant who faced David in one of the most famous stories ever told. The Bible tells us Goliath was from Gath, and he stood 6 cubits and a span tall. Now, a cubit is about 18 inches, and a span is about 9 inches, so that makes Goliath somewhere between 9 and 10 feet tall. That's huge, but it's actually on the smaller end of what some texts describe for the ancient Nephilim. Goliath had 4 brothers, all of them giants. Their names were Ishbi-Benob, Saph, and Lami. Another brother isn't named, but he's described as having 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. That's 24 digits total. Was this a genetic trait among the Nephilim? Some researchers think that extra fingers and toes might have been common among giant bloodlines. But Goliath lived much later, long after the flood. So how could he be a Nephilim? Well, here's where it gets interesting. The Bible tells us that after the flood, the Nephilim appeared again. Genesis chapter 6, verse 4 says, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, after the flood." How is that possible? The flood was supposed to destroy the Nephilim, right? That was part of why it happened. So how did they come back? There are a few theories. One is that the fallen angels, who could apparently travel between realms, did the same thing again after the flood. They took human wives again, and again, giant children were born. This would explain why we see giants popping up in the Bible stories that take place thousands of years after Noah. Another theory is that somehow some giant genetics survived through the flood. Maybe one of Noah's daughters-in-law carried the genes. Maybe it came through a different line. The texts aren't perfectly clear on this, which is why it's debated. But what we do know is that in the land of Canaan, which is where God eventually sent the Israelites to live, there were giants. Multiple kinds of giants, actually. The Bible mentions the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, and the Zamzumim, all of them described as tall, powerful, and frightening. When Moses sent spies into Canaan to scout it out, they came back terrified. They reported, "We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Grasshoppers. That's how huge the difference was. The Anakim were considered the most fearsome. Their name means long-necked ones. They lived in fortified cities with walls that seemed impossibly high. The spies said, "The people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large." One of the Anakim was named Arba. He was considered the greatest warrior among them. He founded a city that was named after him, Kiriath Arba, which later became known as Hebron. This is a real city that still exists today in the West Bank. Another giant from the Anakim line was King Og of Bashan. The Bible gives us a fascinating detail about him. It says his bed was made of iron and was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. That's about 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. Now, beds are usually a bit longer than the person sleeping in them, but even accounting for that, Og must have been somewhere around 11 or 12 feet tall. Think about what it would take to kill a warrior that size. Regular weapons might not even work properly. You'd need special strategies, special courage. It's no wonder that when the Israelites finally did defeat these giants, the victories were celebrated as miracles, because by normal human standards, defeating them should have been impossible. But here's something interesting. While the Bible presents these giants as enemies to be overcome, other ancient cultures celebrated giants as heroes. The Sumerian king list, an ancient text from Mesopotamia, mentions kings who ruled for impossibly long periods and did incredible feats. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories we have, is about a king who was part god and part human, who was much larger and stronger than normal men, and who went on adventures that normal humans couldn't survive. Are these the same beings? Different traditions remembering the same events? Or just coincidence? Scholars argue about this, but the pattern is interesting. All over the ancient world, stories of giants and semi-divine heroes exist. They're not just in the Bible, they're everywhere. Now, let me ask you a question. If you were alive back then, and you saw a giant walk through your village, what would you think? Would you see him as a god? As a monster? As just a very big person? Drop a comment and let me know. I'm curious what your first reaction would be. Chapter 5, Secrets of the Nephilim. So far, we've talked about who the Nephilim were and where they came from. But let's go deeper. What were they really like? What abilities did they have? What did they know that regular humans didn't? The ancient texts give us some clues, and they're fascinating. According to the Book of Enoch, the Nephilim and their fallen angel fathers possessed knowledge that was supposed to remain hidden from humanity. This wasn't just practical knowledge like farming or building. This was secret wisdom about how the world really works. Azazel, one of the fallen angels, taught metalworking and weapon making, but he also taught something else. The text says he taught men about cosmetics and jewelry. Now that might sound harmless, but think about what that really means. He taught vanity. He taught people to value appearance over substance. He taught decoration and adornment that led to pride and lust. He also taught women about makeup and how to beautify their eyes and use precious stones. Again, this might seem innocent, but the text presents it as corrupting, as teaching people to focus on external beauty and attraction in ways that led away from inner goodness. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cutting. This means knowledge of plants and herbs that could be used for potions and spells. Some of this might have been medicinal, but it clearly went beyond that into what we might call magic or sorcery. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. So if Semjaza taught how to create magical effects, Armaros taught how to break them. This suggests there was a whole system of spiritual manipulation being passed down. Barakel taught astrology, not just astronomy, which is the scientific study of stars. Astrology, which is the attempt to predict the future and understand fate by the positions of celestial bodies. The idea that the stars control or predict human destiny. Kokabiel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught knowledge about the clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. Do you see the pattern? All of this knowledge is about trying to predict, control, or manipulate the natural and spiritual world. It's about trying to gain power through hidden wisdom. But there's something else the texts mention that's even more disturbing. They say that the Nephilim and the fallen angels taught humans about abortion, about ways to prevent pregnancy or end it. This is presented as serious wrongdoing, as interfering with life itself in ways that violated natural law. They also taught about oaths and curses, how to bind people with words, how to make promises that had spiritual weight, how to curse your enemies so that harm would come to them. All of this knowledge spread through humanity like a virus. Villages that had lived simply, focused on survival and family and community, suddenly had access to power they'd never imagined. And with that power came conflict, came competition, came corruption. But did the Nephilim themselves have special abilities beyond knowledge? Some traditions say yes. They suggest that having angel fathers gave them certain supernatural traits. Extraordinary strength, obviously, but also possibly enhanced senses, longer lifespans, greater intelligence. Some texts even suggest they could communicate with spiritual beings or see into the spiritual realm in ways humans couldn't. There's a fascinating passage in the Book of Jasher, another ancient text, that describes the Nephilim as eating enormous amounts of food. It says they consumed the entire harvest. When that ran out, they turned to animals, and when animals became scarce, the text darkly hints that they turned to eating people. Whether this is literal cannibalism or figurative language meaning they destroyed people, we can't be certain, but it paints a picture of beings with appetites and desires that couldn't be satisfied. Now here's where we get into really controversial territory. Some researchers today claim to have found evidence of the Nephilim. Actual physical evidence, giant skeletons, oversized weapons and armor, massive structures that seem impossible for normal humans to have built. In the 1800s, newspapers in America frequently reported discoveries of giant skeletons, bones of people 7, 8, even 9 feet tall or more. Some reports mentioned skulls with double rows of teeth. Others mentioned the six-fingered, six-toed extremities we talked about earlier. The Smithsonian Institution allegedly has many of these remains, though they're not on public display. Some conspiracy theorists claim this is a cover-up, that evidence is being hidden because it would challenge evolutionary theories or raise uncomfortable questions. Others say the giant skeleton stories were hoaxes or exaggerations, that the bones were actually from large normal humans or were misidentified animal bones. What's the truth? It's hard to say, but it's interesting that the stories exist, isn't it? It's interesting that cultures all over the world have traditions about giants. It's interesting that ancient structures like Stonehenge, or the pyramids, or Baalbek in Lebanon, have stones so massive that even with modern equipment, we're not entirely sure how they were moved. Could the Nephilim have been real? Could beings of extraordinary size and strength have helped build some of these ancient wonders? Or are we looking for mysteries where none exist, seeing patterns in random facts? I want you to hit that subscribe button if you're still with me, because we're about to transition into something important. We've talked about who the Nephilim were and what they did. Now we need to talk about what happened to them. And to understand that, we need to meet a man named Noah. Chapter 6. The world before the flood. Take a moment and try to imagine a world completely different from ours. Not just ancient, but alien in how it worked. A world where people lived for hundreds of years, where violence was normal, where knowledge of secrets gave certain people terrible power, where giants ruled nations. This was the pre-flood world, and according to the Bible, it got so bad that God regretted making humans in the first place. That's a shocking statement. Genesis chapter 6 verse 6 says, "The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled." What would it take for the creator of everything to regret creating humanity? What would things have to be like for God himself to be heartbroken over what his creation had become? The text tells us that the earth was filled with violence. The Hebrew word used there is Hamas, which means violence, wrong, cruelty. It had become the default setting of human society. Not occasional violence, but constant. Not the exception, but the rule. It also says that every inclination of human thoughts was only evil all the time. Think about that. Every inclination, only evil, all the time. Not sometimes, not mostly, constantly, completely. How does a species get to that point? How does an entire world become so corrupted that there's no good left in it? The text suggests it was a combination of factors. The influence of the fallen angels, the domination of the Nephilim, the forbidden knowledge that had been shared, the breaking of natural boundaries. In a world where might made right, where the strong took from the weak, where supernatural beings demanded worship, where violence was celebrated and kindness was seen as weakness, goodness couldn't survive. It got crushed. It got corrupted. It got erased. Imagine being a parent trying to raise children in that world. How do you teach them to be kind when kindness gets you killed? How do you teach them to share when hoarders survive and sharers starve? How do you teach them to worship the Creator when giants are standing right there, visible and powerful, demanding worship for themselves? The pressure to conform, to go along, to accept the way things were, must have been enormous. Standing against it would make you an outcast, a target, a fool. And yet, one man did stand against it. One family held on to goodness when everything around them was evil. One household remembered the Creator when the rest of the world had forgotten. His name was Noah. And he's important not because he was perfect, but because he was faithful. Genesis chapter 6 verse 9 says, "Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God." Blameless among the people of his time. That doesn't necessarily mean he never made mistakes. It means that in a generation where everyone else had given up on righteousness, he hadn't. In a world where everyone else had forgotten God, he remembered. In a culture where violence was normal, he chose peace. That's harder than it sounds. It's easy to be good when everyone around you is good. It's easy to do the right thing when the right thing is rewarded. But Noah lived in a world where doing good probably made his life harder, not easier, where faithfulness probably cost him, not benefited him, where standing apart probably made him a joke, not a hero. The Bible doesn't give us a lot of details about Noah's life before the flood, but we can imagine. Maybe he had a small farm outside of a city ruled by Nephilim. Maybe he kept to himself, working hard, teaching his sons to honor the old ways. Maybe people mocked him for praying to a god they'd never seen when there were giants right there they could see and touch and fear. Maybe his family was seen as strange, the weird family that still talks about the Creator, the backwards people who refuse to worship the mighty ones, the fools who think there's something wrong with how everyone else lives. And then one day, God spoke to him, the Creator, who had watched his creation spiral into darkness, who had seen violence fill the earth, who had witnessed the corruption of nearly everything he had made, chose this one man to deliver a message to. The message was this: it's going to end. All of it. The violence, the corruption, the Nephilim, the influence of the fallen angels, the evil that fills every thought. It's all going to be washed away. The world is going to be cleansed. But there will be a way to survive. Build an ark. Build it to these exact specifications. Make it strong. Make it sealed. Make it big enough for your family and representatives of all the animals. Because when the flood comes, everything else will be destroyed, but you and yours will be saved. Now imagine hearing that. Imagine being told that the entire world is about to be destroyed, but you have a chance to survive if you'll build a massive boat in the middle of dry land. Would you believe it? Would you do it? Or would you think you were losing your mind? Noah believed. And that belief was about to be tested in ways he couldn't imagine. Because building the ark wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick, and it wouldn't be private. Coming up, we're going to talk about what it took to build the impossible, the challenges Noah faced, the mockery he endured, and the moment when everything he'd been warned about finally came true. Chapter 7. One righteous man. Let's think about Noah as a real person for a minute. Not just a name in an old story, but a man with thoughts and feelings and fears and doubts. What must it have been like to be him? He was 600 years old when the flood came. People lived much longer back then, so he wasn't ancient by the standards of his time, but he was mature, experienced. He'd seen a lot of life. He'd watched the world get worse and worse for centuries. He had a wife. The Bible doesn't tell us her name, but she was there. She was part of this. She believed her husband when he told her God had spoken to him. She supported the plan. She helped. Think about what a remarkable woman she must have been. He had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They were grown men, old enough to be married. Their wives were part of the family too. That's 8 people total. 8 humans who would survive the greatest catastrophe the world had ever known. But before survival came preparation, and preparation meant building. God gave Noah detailed instructions. Use gopher wood, make rooms in it, coat it with pitch inside and out, make it 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. That's about 450 feet long, 75 feet wide and 45 feet high. For comparison, that's about 1.5 football fields long and as tall as a 4-story building. Put a roof on it and finish it to a cubit from the top. Put a door in the side. Make 3 decks, lower, middle, and upper. This wasn't a small project. This was massive. It would take decades to complete. Decades of labor, decades of expense, decades of commitment. Where did Noah get the resources? The Bible doesn't say, but he must have had wealth or property to trade. He must have had skills or knowledge that allowed him to acquire what he needed. Maybe he sold everything he had. Maybe he called in favors. Maybe he worked other jobs to fund the boat building, and he couldn't do it alone. 3 sons, even strong ones, aren't enough to build something that massive. Did he hire workers? Did he have servants or slaves? Did people from nearby villages help at first, before they realized how strange the project was? However it worked, word spread. Noah's building a boat, a huge boat, in the middle of dry land, because he says God told him a flood is coming. A flood big enough to cover the whole earth. Can you imagine the reactions? At first, maybe curiosity. People came to look, ask questions. Noah probably tried to warn them. This is serious. Judgment is coming. The world has become too evil. God is going to cleanse it with water. You should prepare. You should change. You should turn back to the Creator. But as the years passed and no flood came, curiosity turned to mockery. Look at the crazy old man and his boat. He thinks it's going to rain enough to flood the whole world. He thinks God is angry about how we live. He thinks he's better than us. The Nephilim probably heard about it too. Maybe some of them came to see, towering over Noah and his family, making threats or jokes. What's this ant building? You think your little boat is going to save you from anything? You think you're special? But Noah kept building, day after day, year after year, sawing wood, fitting pieces, coating surfaces with pitch to make them waterproof, following the instructions exactly, trusting that even though he'd never seen rain like what was promised, even though it seemed impossible, God knew what he was doing. His sons grew up on that construction site. They learned carpentry and engineering. They learned to ignore mockery. They learned that faithfulness means doing what's right even when everyone thinks you're wrong. And their wives, they married into this. They joined a family that was known as the weird ones, the fanatics, the boat builders. It must have been isolating. It must have been hard. But finally, after decades of work, it was done. The ark stood complete, massive, sealed, ready. And then God gave the next instruction. It was time to load it. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I do, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps the video reach more people. And make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to get to the most dramatic part of the story. The part where everything Noah had been warning about finally happened. Chapter 8. Building the impossible. The ark wasn't just big, it was perfect for its purpose. Naval engineers today have analyzed its dimensions, and they found something remarkable. The ratios of length to width to height make it incredibly stable. It wouldn't tip easily. It wouldn't break apart in violent waters. It was designed not to travel anywhere, but to survive, to float and endure no matter what. Think about what had to go into it. The lower deck probably held the largest animals. creatures that needed serious space and support. The middle deck might have held medium-sized animals, and the upper deck the smaller ones and the birds. The family would have lived somewhere in there too, probably near the food supplies and water storage. Speaking of food, that's another massive consideration. How do you feed two of every kind of animal for months? Some animals eat meat, others eat plants. Some eat specific plants. Some need fresh water. Some need different temperatures. God told Noah to store food for the animals and for his family. That means gathering vast quantities of grain, hay, seeds, dried fruits, dried meat. It means creating storage systems that keep things from rotting or getting wet. It means planning and calculating and organizing. And then came the moment when God said it was time to load the ark. Genesis chapter 7 tells us that God himself brought the animals to Noah. They came on their own, pairs of birds flying in, pairs of mammals walking up the ramp, pairs of reptiles crawling, pairs of insects buzzing. Some animals came in groups of 7 pairs instead of just 1 pair. The clean animals, the text calls them. These were probably the ones used for sacrifice and sometimes for food. Animals like sheep, goats, cattle, deer. Imagine watching this. Imagine being one of the mockers who had laughed at Noah for years, and suddenly you see animals streaming toward the boat. Animals from far away. Animals that shouldn't be together. Predators and prey walking side by side, ignoring each other, all heading for the same impossible ship. Some people must have started to worry at that point. Some must have thought, wait, maybe he's not crazy. Maybe something really is about to happen. But most probably still didn't believe, because the sky was still clear. The sun still shone. Life went on as normal. The Bible says that in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and being given in marriage, right up until the day Noah entered the ark. They didn't believe until it was too late. Finally, after all the animals were aboard, Noah and his family entered. 8 people walking up that ramp, walking into that massive wooden structure, probably looking back at the world one last time, at the hills and valleys they knew, at the cities in the distance, at neighbors and strangers watching them go. And then something happened that must have terrified everyone watching. Genesis chapter 7 verse 16 says that after Noah and his family entered, the Lord shut him in. The door closed, not by human hands. God himself sealed it. Try to imagine that moment. The massive door swinging shut, the sound of it closing, the finality of it. And then what? Silence. Waiting. Noah and his family inside the dark ark with hundreds or thousands of animals. People outside wondering if anything would actually happen. Maybe some of them banged on the door. Maybe some of them shouted for Noah to let them in. Maybe some of them started to pray to the Creator they'd forgotten, making promises they'd never kept before. But the door stayed shut, and then the sky began to change. Clouds formed, dark clouds, thicker than any clouds people had seen before. The air pressure changed, the wind picked up, and then it started. Rain, but not normal rain. The text says the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Water came from below and above at the same time. The springs under the earth erupted, the sky poured. At first, maybe it was just alarming. People ran for shelter, they covered their heads, They complained about getting wet, but it didn't stop. The rain kept coming, harder, heavier, constant. Streams began to form where there had been dry ground, then rivulets, then rivers. The water started to rise, ankle deep, knee deep, waist deep, and it kept coming. Now people started to panic. They ran for higher ground. They climbed hills. They fled to the cities, thinking the walls would protect them. The Nephilim used their strength to reach tall structures, confident their power would save them. But the water rose and rose and rose. Genesis chapter 7 says that all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. The waters rose more than 20 feet above the mountains. 20 feet. That's enough to drown anything trying to survive on the peaks. Drop a comment if you can imagine what that must have been like. The terror, the realization, the moment when even the strongest giant understood that no amount of strength would save him from this. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The first week inside the ark must have been the strangest week of Noah's life. The rain pounded on the roof. The animals made noises, adjusting to their pens and cages. The family probably stayed close together, eating meals in the dim light, praying, waiting. They could hear it all. The rain, the rising water, and probably for a while, the sounds from outside. Voices, screaming, banging on the hull. People who had ignored the warnings now desperate for rescue. But the door was sealed, not by Noah, by God. Even if Noah had wanted to open it, he couldn't. This wasn't his judgment. This was God's, and it had been decided. The Bible doesn't dwell on the suffering of those outside. It doesn't give us details, but we can imagine. We can picture families huddling together on rooftops as the water climbed. We can picture the mighty Nephilim, so used to being powerful, now helpless against the flood. We can picture the fallen angels who had corrupted so much, watching their hybrid children die. Genesis says that everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Everything. Birds, livestock, wild animals, creatures that swarm, and all mankind. Everything that breathed air and lived on land perished. Only Noah and those with him in the ark survived. The world that had existed before was being erased. The cities the Nephilim had built were being buried. The altars raised to the fallen angels were being destroyed. The monuments to violence and pride were being washed away. It was a reset, a cleansing, a terrible mercy. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain continued. By the end of that time, the ark wasn't resting on the ground anymore. It was floating, being carried on the surface of a worldwide ocean. The highest mountains were underwater. The earth had returned, in a way, to how it was before the third day of creation, when God separated the waters and let dry land appear. Now the water had returned, and the land was hidden. Inside the ark, Noah and his family had to trust that the structure would hold, that the pitch wouldn't crack, that the seams wouldn't split, that the measurements God had given were perfect. Every creak of wood, every shift of the vessel must have been a moment of tension. Are we safe? Is this it? But the ark held. Day after day, week after week, it floated, protected, preserved, carrying the future of life on earth. After 40 days, the rain stopped, but the water didn't immediately recede. It stayed high. For months, the ark drifted on a world covered by ocean. Genesis tells us it came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Even today, people search those mountains in Turkey, looking for remains of the ark. Some claim to have found it. Others say the evidence isn't clear, but the mountain range is real, and the story points to it as the ark's final resting place. Even after the ark settled, the family had to wait. The water slowly went down, slowly, over months. Noah sent out a raven at one point, and it flew back and forth, finding nowhere to land. Then he sent out a dove. The first time it came back, there was nowhere for it to rest. The second time, it came back with a fresh olive leaf in its beak. That must have been an incredible moment. It meant that somewhere, plants were growing again. Life was returning. The third time Noah sent the dove out, it didn't come back. It had found a place to make a home. Finally, after more than a year inside the ark, God told Noah it was time to come out. Can you imagine that moment? Opening the door, stepping out into fresh air, seeing the sun, seeing dry ground, seeing a world washed clean, but also seeing a world empty. No cities, no people, no Nephilim, just Noah's family and the animals leaving the ark, stepping into a silent planet. They were the only humans left. The only chance for humanity to start over. The first thing Noah did was build an altar, not to himself, not to celebrate his own survival, but to worship the God who had saved him. He took some of the clean animals and offered them as sacrifices. The text says that the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of humans," even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. "And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done." It's a promise, a covenant. God placed a rainbow in the sky as a sign. Every time it rains and a rainbow appears, it's a reminder that the waters will never again flood the whole earth. And so humanity started over. Noah and his family repopulated the world. They spread out. They had children. Those children had children. Nations formed. Languages developed. Cultures grew. And the memory of the flood, the memory of the giants, the memory of the world before, was passed down through stories. But here's the question that bothers a lot of people. If the flood destroyed the Nephilim, why do we see giants again later in the Bible? Why does the Bible mention the Anakim and the Rephaim and giants in the land of Canaan? Where did they come from? That's what we'll explore next. Because the story of the Nephilim doesn't quite end with the flood. There's more. And it's just as mysterious as what came before. If you've made it this far, you're clearly interested in this topic. Make sure you share this video with someone who would find it fascinating. And let me know in the comments, what do you think happened? How did giants appear again after the flood? Chapter 10, 40 Days and 40 Nights. Let's slow down and really think about what those 40 days and nights were like. Because when we read the story quickly, it's easy to skip over the reality of it. 40 days doesn't sound that long, but imagine living it. Imagine the first day. You're sealed inside a massive wooden boat. It's dark, except for the window near the top. You can hear the rain starting. Just rain at first. It's loud on the roof. The animals are restless, making noise, adjusting to captivity. You eat a meal with your family. Bread, dried fruit, water. You try to sleep on whatever bedding you've prepared. The sound of rain is constant, loud. You've never heard rain like this. Day 2. The rain hasn't stopped. It's actually gotten worse, harder. You can hear water rushing outside. When you look through the window, you can see that the ground is already flooded. Streams have become rivers. The world is turning into a lake. Day 3. You feel the ark shift slightly. It's starting to float, just a little at first. A gentle lifting. It's both reassuring, the boat is doing what it's supposed to, and terrifying, because now you're not connected to the ground anymore. You're adrift. Day 5. You hear noises outside, voices, screaming, pounding on the wooden hull. People want in. They're begging, pleading, praying. Your wife cries. Your sons ask if you should try to help, but the door is sealed by God. You can't open it even if you wanted to. You pray for the people outside, but you can't save them. Day 10. The voices have stopped. The water is deep now, very deep. You can't see land anymore when you look out. Just water in every direction. The ark rocks gently. Some of the animals have gotten used to it. Others are still agitated. You've developed routines, feeding schedules, cleaning schedules. It helps to stay busy. Day 20. You've lost track of the outside world completely. It's just you, your family, the animals, and the rain. Always the rain. Pounding. Relentless. You wonder if it will ever stop. You wonder if God has forgotten you, but you trust. You remember the promise. You remember that God willed you to build this ark, and if He wanted you to survive, there must be a purpose. Day 30. The younger members of the family are getting restless. There's not much to do, not much space to move. The air inside smells like animals and wet wood and sweat. Everyone is tired of being cooped up, but the rain continues. Day 40, and then, finally, it stops. The sound that has been constant for more than a month suddenly ceases. The silence is almost shocking. You look out the window. The sky is still cloudy, but the rain has stopped. You feel hope for the first time in weeks, but the waiting isn't over. The water is still incredibly deep. It will take months to recede, months more of floating, of feeding animals, of living in close quarters with your family, of wondering when and where you'll finally be able to leave. During those long months, there must have been conversations, long talks about what the new world would be like, about what they would do first, about how they would start over. Maybe they made plans, decided where to settle, discussed how to divide the land, talked about the mistakes of the old world and how to avoid them. They must have also talked about what they'd lost, friends who hadn't listened, places they'd loved that were now buried under miles of water, the life they'd known that was gone forever. Grief would have been part of the experience. Even though they were saved, they'd lost almost everything else. And what about the fallen angels and their offspring? The Bible suggests that the angels were bound and imprisoned. 2 Peter chapter 2 and Jude both mention angels being kept in chains in darkness until the judgment. Their rebellion had consequences. Their punishment began, and the Nephilim, they died. Their physical bodies perished in the flood, but some ancient texts suggest that their spirits became something else. Demons, disembodied spirits that wander the earth, looking for bodies to inhabit, causing trouble, spreading evil in spiritual ways instead of physical ways. This is speculative theology, not clearly stated in the Bible, But it's a tradition that's been around for thousands of years. The idea that demons are the spirits of the deceased Nephilim, trying to continue their rebellion in a different form. Whether that's true or not, what's clear is that the physical threat of the Nephilim ended with the flood. Their kingdoms were destroyed. Their violence was stopped. Their influence was washed away. The earth was cleansed. Month 6. The ark settles on solid ground. You feel it touch down. It's not floating anymore. It's resting on a mountain. The water is still high, but you're on something solid. It's progress. Month 10. The tops of other mountains become visible. The water is definitely receding. You send out the raven. It doesn't find anywhere to land, but it's a test. A way of checking on the world outside. Month 11. You send out the dove. It comes back with an olive leaf. Your wife cries again, but this time with joy. Trees are growing. Plants have survived or are growing again. Life is returning. Month 12. You send the dove again. This time, it doesn't come back. Your sons cheer. It means there's dry land out there, enough for a bird to make a home. Month 13. God speaks to you again for the first time since you entered the ark. He says it's time. Time to open the door. Time to leave. Time to start the new world. Your hands shake as you work to unseal the door. Your family gathers behind you. The animals sense something is happening. They make noise, excited or nervous. And then the door opens. Fresh air rushes in. Sunlight, real sunlight, streams through. You step out onto the ramp. Your feet touch dirt for the first time in over a year. You look around at mountains and valleys and a world that's empty and clean and full of possibility. You fall to your knees and thank God. Your family joins you. The animals begin to leave the ark, rushing out into freedom. Birds take flight. Deer bound away. Predators and prey separate naturally now that the crisis is over. And you realize something. You've been given a second chance. All of humanity has been given a second chance. The question is, what will you do with it? Share this video if you think this story has something important to teach us today, because the themes, pride, corruption, judgment, mercy, new beginnings, they're timeless, aren't they? Chapter 11, When the Waters Rose. Let's talk about something that many people wonder about, the flood itself. Was it really worldwide? Is there evidence? What do we make of this event scientifically and historically? The Bible is clear that the flood covered the whole earth. Genesis says the waters rose greatly and covered all the high mountains under the entire heavens. Every living thing that moved on land perished. Only Noah and those with him in the ark survived. That's a global flood. Complete. Total. Covering everything. And for a long time, that's exactly how everyone understood the story. A worldwide catastrophe that reset creation. But in modern times, some people struggle with this. They ask questions. Where did all that water come from? Where did it go? Wouldn't there be more geological evidence? How could sea creatures survive if salt water and fresh water mixed? How did plants recover? How did ecosystems rebuild so quickly? These are fair questions, and there are different ways people who believe the Bible try to answer them. Some say that the pre-flood world was very different geographically. Maybe the mountains weren't as high. Maybe there was a water canopy surrounding the earth, that provided some of the flood water. Maybe underground reservoirs, the fountains of the deep, held vast amounts of water that burst out. After the flood, maybe massive geological changes happened. Mountains rose, valleys sank, the water drained into new ocean basins. Others point to evidence they believe supports a worldwide flood. Sedimentary rock layers found all over the world, fossils of sea creatures on top of mountains, coal and oil deposits that suggest rapid burial of organic material, canyon formations that could have been carved by catastrophic water flow rather than slow erosion over millions of years. Then there are those who interpret the flood as regional rather than global. They suggest that the whole earth in the text means the whole known world to Noah, his entire region, that the flood was devastating to the ancient Near East, but not literally planetary. This is debated among scholars and theologians. People who equally respect the Bible sometimes come to different conclusions about the details, while agreeing on the main point. God judged a wicked world, and Noah and his family were saved. But here's something interesting that most people agree on. Cultures all over the world have flood stories. Native American tribes, Chinese traditions, Mesopotamian epics like Gilgamesh, Hindu texts, Greek myths, Aboriginal Australian stories, Pacific Island legends. Over 200 cultures have stories about a great flood that destroyed most of humanity. Why? If the flood was just a local event in the Middle East, why do people on every continent have similar stories? This is one of the strongest arguments that something major really happened, that there's a shared human memory of a catastrophic flood. The details vary. In some stories, the survivors escape in a boat. In others, they climb a mountain. Some name the hero different names. Some have multiple gods causing the flood instead of one god. But the core is similar. Humanity was wicked. A flood came as judgment. A few people were warned and survived. The world started over. It's as if the memory of the event scattered with humanity as they spread across the globe after the flood, and each culture preserved the memory in its own way, with its own details, but keeping the heart of the story intact. Now, let's talk about something that's both fascinating and troubling. What happened to all those people who died in the flood? The Bible doesn't give us a detailed answer about the spiritual fate of everyone who perished, but it does give us principles. It tells us that God is just, that He judges fairly, that He takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked, that He's patient and gives people time to repent. Noah preached righteousness for years while building the ark. People had opportunities to change. They chose not to. It also tells us that sin has consequences, that a world filled with violence and corruption can't continue indefinitely. That judgment, while terrible, is sometimes necessary to protect what's good and give righteousness a chance to flourish again. The flood wasn't cruel. It was heartbreaking. God's heart was troubled before He sent it, but He also saw something that we couldn't see. He saw the absolute state of human hearts. He saw that without intervention, evil would consume everything, that eventually, even the possibility of goodness would be extinguished. The flood was a preservation of hope, a violent cutting away of cancer so that the body could survive, painful, devastating, but ultimately merciful because it allowed for a future. And that future started with 8 people stepping out of an ark onto wet ground. 8 people who would have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. 8 people from whom every human alive today descends. If you trace your ancestry back far enough, you get to Noah. That's what the Bible claims, that all of us, no matter our race or nationality or culture, came from that one family. We're all related, all cousins in a sense, all part of the new beginning that God gave humanity. That's a powerful thought. It means that what happened to Noah's family matters to you. Their story is your story. Their second chance is your heritage. And it means that the lessons from the flood apply to us too. The warnings about pride and violence and corruption. The example of faithfulness in the midst of wickedness. The reminder that God sees, God cares, and God acts. The promise that even in judgment, there's mercy for those who trust Him. So what do you think? Do you believe the flood really happened? Do you think it was global or regional? Do you think the evidence supports it or contradicts it? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing different perspectives. Chapter 12, Echoes of the Giants. Now we come to the question that lingers. If the flood destroyed the Nephilim, if it wiped out the giants and cleansed the earth of their corruption, why do we see giants again later in the Bible? Why does Moses send spies into Canaan and they report seeing Nephilim? Why does David fight Goliath? Where did these later giants come from? The Bible gives us a clue in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. It says, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, after the flood." This little phrase suggests that somehow the giant problem returned. There are several theories about how this happened, and it's worth exploring them because they lead to interesting questions about genetics, spirituality, and the ongoing battle between good and evil. Theory 1. The fallen angels did it again. After the flood, some of these spiritual beings who had survived because they're not physical creatures did the same thing they'd done before. They came to Earth and took human wives, and once again, giant offspring were born. This would explain why we see giants in Canaan and other places centuries after the flood. It happened again, though perhaps on a smaller scale. This theory has some support in ancient texts outside the Bible, which suggests that this kind of corruption continued in certain bloodlines and regions. It would mean that the temptation and rebellion that led to the first Nephilim was still active, still causing problems, still needing to be dealt with. Theory 2. The giant trait came through the flood in human genetics. Maybe one of Noah's daughters-in-law, the wives of Shem, Ham, or Japheth, carried giant ancestry in her bloodline. Not enough to make her a giant, but enough that the genes could express themselves in later generations under certain conditions. Ham's son was named Canaan, and the land of Canaan is where most of the post-flood giants lived. The Anakim, the Rephaim, the Zamzumim, they were all in or near Canaan. Is this a clue? Did the giant trait come through Ham's line? The Bible does tell us that Noah cursed Canaan after an incident involving Ham. While the curse was about servitude, not size, it's interesting that the land of Canaan became known for its giants. This theory is controversial because it suggests the flood didn't completely accomplish its purpose of eliminating the Nephilim corruption. But others say that's too simplistic, that the flood eliminated the wickedness of that generation and the influence of the fallen angels, even if some genetic traits remained dormant. Theory 3. The later giants weren't Nephilim at all. They were just very large humans. Abnormally tall, yes, but not the hybrid offspring of angels. The word Nephilim might have been used loosely by the Israelite spies because they were scared and exaggerating, or because in their culture, any giant was associated with the old stories of the Nephilim. This theory explains why the post-flood giants, while impressive, don't seem to have the same level of supernatural power as the pre-flood Nephilim. Goliath was big and strong, but he was still just a man. David killed him with a stone. The Anakim were defeated by Joshua and the Israelites. They were formidable enemies, but not unstoppable. So which theory is correct? Honestly, we don't know for sure. The Bible doesn't give us enough detail to be certain. What we do know is that giants appeared again, and that they were seen as enemies of God's people, obstacles to be overcome. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the specifics of where they came from matters less than what they represent. They represent opposition, intimidation, the temptation to fear and give up, the challenge to trust God even when the odds seem impossible. When the Israelites saw giants in Canaan, they had a choice. Trust that God could give them victory or give in to fear. 10 of the 12 spies said, "We can't do it. They're too big. We're like grasshoppers compared to them." But 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, said, "With God's help, we can do this. Don't be afraid." The people chose fear, and because of that, they wandered in the desert for 40 years until that fearful generation died off. Only then did their children, led by Joshua, enter the land and face the giants with faith. And you know what? They won. Joshua defeated the Anakim. He destroyed their cities. He drove them out of the hill country. David killed Goliath and his brothers. Over time, the giants faded from history again. Today, we don't have literal giants to fight, but we have obstacles that seem overwhelming, problems that make us feel like grasshoppers, challenges that tempt us to turn back instead of moving forward. The story of the Nephilim, from their origin to their destruction to their strange reappearance and final defeat, teaches us something important. It teaches us that evil is real, that corruption can spread, that power without righteousness is dangerous. But it also teaches us that God is greater, that He judges evil, that He preserves good, that He gives second chances, and that with faith, even giants can be defeated. So as we close this journey, let me ask you one final question. What's your giant? What's the thing in your life that seems too big to overcome? What makes you feel like a grasshopper? Maybe it's a habit you can't break. Maybe it's a fear that controls you. Maybe it's a person who intimidates you. Maybe it's a dream that seems impossible. Whatever it is, the story of Noah and the giants reminds us that with faith and obedience, impossible things become possible. Noah built an impossible boat and saved the world. David faced an impossible giant and became a king. Joshua conquered an impossible land and gave his people a home. What impossible thing is God calling you to do? If this video has made you think, if it's inspired you or challenged you or taught you something, please hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about what spoke to you most. And remember, the God who judged the Nephilim, who saved Noah, who helped David, who gave Joshua victory, that same God is here with you today. Whatever you're facing, you don't face it alone. Whatever giant stands in your way, you don't have to defeat it in your own strength. Have faith, take courage, and step forward. because the story isn't over. It continues in you, in your choices, in your faith, in your willingness to trust that the God of ancient days is still the God of today. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. May you walk in wisdom, in courage, and in the knowledge that you're part of a story far bigger and more ancient than you ever imagined. Sleep well, and remember, even giants fall.